This is the story of Mark Ellison and his wife Rachel Ellison. They had been married for 9 years when the quiet started. Not the comfortable kind that settles between two people who know each other well, but the kind that fills space where conversation used to be. Mark was a methodical man, the sort who believed that most problems, if left alone, would eventually find their own resolution. Rachel was the opposite. She needed things named, addressed, filed away. For years, these two tendencies had balanced each other. Then, gradually, they began to grind. The tension between them was never loud. It lived in the half-second delays before answers, in the way Rachel laughed a little too easily at things that weren't quite funny, in the way Mark stopped asking about her day and started simply nodding at the answer he assumed she'd give. What would unravel them was not dramatic in its origin. It was ordinary, even predictable. The slow substitution of one kind of attention for another, and the lie both of them told themselves that this was fine, that they were fine, that a marriage could hold its shape indefinitely even as its interior quietly hollowed. The house smelled like garlic and olive oil on Thursday evenings. That was the one constant Rachel had maintained through every phase of their marriage. Cooking dinner on Thursdays, the only night neither of them had anything scheduled. Mark used to come home to find her barefoot in the kitchen, slightly frustrated with whatever the recipe had done wrong, and he poured 2 glasses of wine and sit at the counter and just watch her, and that had been enough. Now he came home to find dinner already plated, kept warm in the oven, and Rachel on the couch with her laptop, one leg folded beneath her, barely looking up when the door opened. "Hey," she said. "Hey," he said back. He hung his jacket. He washed his hands. He took his plate from the oven and sat at the table alone, and that was also fine. That was just Thursday now. Mark worked as a senior analyst at Devereaux Capital, a mid-sized asset management firm in the financial district. He was good at his job, careful, precise, the kind of employee who never needed to be asked twice. His direct supervisor was a man named Glenn Farber, 51, recently divorced, the type who wore his authority like a well-fitted coat. Glenn ran the department with a loose, almost social energy. He remembered birthdays. He brought in bottles of wine on Fridays. He called everyone by short inversions of their names, which Mark had always found mildly irritating but had never mentioned. Rachel had met Glenn at the company's spring event 2 years ago. Mark remembered watching them talk and thinking, she's laughing at something and feeling nothing in particular about it. That had been the first small failure. Not suspicion, but the absence of any instinct at all. The two of them had stayed in contact after that. Rachel mentioned it once, maybe twice, that Glenn had texted about a networking contact she'd asked about, that they'd had coffee near her office because he was in her neighborhood. Mark had nodded. He had asked no follow-up questions. This was his way. If it wasn't yet a fire, he wasn't going to treat it like a spark. In October, Rachel started coming home later on Wednesdays. She said it was a project, something with a client who could only do evening calls. Mark didn't check. He believed her, not because he was naive, but because disbelieving her required a kind of energy he had quietly decided not to spend. On a Tuesday in early November, they were lying in bed reading when Rachel put down her book and said, "Do you feel like we talk enough?" Mark looked up. "We're talking right now." She looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully decode, somewhere between tired and something sharper. "That's not really an answer." "I know," he said. He turned the page. He did not elaborate, and she did not push, and that silence filled the room like water filling a container, slow and certain. She picked her book back up. After a moment, so did he. It was 3 weeks later, on a Wednesday, that he came home early from a work trip, a canceled second meeting, a train caught 2 hours ahead of schedule. The lights were on upstairs. He could see them from the street. He stood outside for a moment before going in. He noticed, but did not yet name, that the car in the driveway was not one he recognized. He went inside. He climbed the stairs slowly, not from suspicion, but from the particular tiredness that comes from travel. The bedroom door was not fully closed. There was a sound. Then another. He stood in the hallway and understood everything at once. Not in pieces, but all together. The way you understand a sentence not word by word, but as a whole. He did not open the door. He stood there for a long moment, and then he walked back down the stairs and sat at the kitchen table in his coat. His hands were flat on the surface. His breathing was even. Outside, a car passed, and the headlights swept across the wall, and then it was dark again. He sat there for a very long time. He had not slept in his own bed that night. He'd taken the spare room without ceremony, telling himself it was simply because he'd come home late and didn't want to disturb her. This was the story he gave himself for approximately 48 hours before he stopped bothering. There is a specific kind of grief that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with force or with tears or with the shattering feeling people describe. It arrives like a shift in air pressure. You don't notice the moment it changes, only that at some point you began breathing differently. Mark moved through the following days with a precision that felt almost mechanical. He went to work. He sat in meetings. He received emails from Glenn, direct, professional, CC'd to the team, and he read them and responded and did not allow his face to change. Rachel had come to bed that night after. He'd heard the soft click of the lamp, the quiet creak of the mattress. He'd lain in the spare room with his eyes open, and he'd thought, "She doesn't know I know." And that single fact, that he held something she didn't realize he held, had given him a strange and unwelcome sense of control. He wasn't sure what to do with it. In the weeks that followed, he began watching her in a way he hadn't in years. Not out of jealousy or anger, but with a kind of clear-eyed attention. He noticed how she arranged her face when she answered his ordinary questions. He noticed the way she'd started keeping her phone screen down at the table. He noticed the small rehearsed quality of her cheerfulness on certain evenings, the particular effort she put into seeming relaxed. One evening, she poured him a glass of wine without being asked and sat down across from him and said, "You've been quiet lately." "Work's been heavy," he said. "You're not usually this quiet even when work's heavy." He looked at her. She was wearing the green sweater he'd always liked. Her hair was pulled back. She looked like his wife, entirely, convincingly like his wife. And he felt a grief so specific it had the texture of a physical thing. "I'm fine," he said. "I'm just tired." She nodded slowly, the way people nod when they don't entirely believe something, but have decided not to pursue it. He watched her decide. He watched her choose the easier thing. "Okay," she said, and took a sip of her wine. He thought about what it would look like if he said it then. Just laid it flat on the table between them like an object, I know. He imagined her face, the sequence of expressions, the first denial, then the recalibration, then whatever she would construct in its place. He found he didn't want to watch that. He wasn't ready for it to become a scene. He needed it to be a decision first, his own. He called his younger sister, Petra, on a Saturday morning, ostensibly to catch up. Halfway through their conversation, he said, without planning to, "Can I ask you something hypothetically?" "Of course." "If someone discovered something that changed everything they thought they knew, do you think it's better to act immediately or to wait until you understand what you actually want?" Petra was quiet for a moment. She knew him well enough not to push. "I think," she said carefully, "that acting from clarity is better than acting from shock. But I also think waiting too long can become its own kind of avoidance." He said, "Yeah. Then, how are the kids?" She let him change the subject. That was one of the things he appreciated most about his sister. Over the following days, he began to document. Not obsessively, not vindictively, methodically, the way he approached everything. He would back through phone records tied to their shared account. He noted dates. He cross-referenced them with the Wednesdays, the canceled plans, the evenings Rachel had come home with her hair slightly different, her posture carrying something he'd mistaken for fatigue. And then he made a quiet decision about the recording. It was not a decision made in rage. He wasn't thinking about punishment. He was thinking about protection, the kind you build before you need it, before the other person has time to control what the truth looks like. He set his phone to record the next time he heard that car in the driveway on a Wednesday. He put it on the hallway table beneath a folded jacket. He did not look at it again until the following week, when he retrieved it and sat in his car in a parking garage and pressed play. Hearing it was different from knowing it. He sat there for a long time afterward, in the yellow-gray light of the garage, until the file ended and the phone went dark. And then he sat a little longer. He drove home. He made dinner. He said nothing. He requested a morning meeting with HR on a Thursday. The HR director at Devereaux Capital was a woman named Patricia Osei, composed, unhurried, the kind of professional who had learned to keep her expression neutral enough to receive any information without reacting to it in the moment. Mark had spoken with her twice before in his career, once about a benefits question and once during a restructuring conversation. He respected her competence. He sat across from her and he placed a folder on the desk. Inside it were printed phone records. 2 dates cross-referenced with Glenn's calendar, which was shared across the department. and a copy of the audio file on a thumb drive with a typed timestamp and location note attached. He said, "I want to report a relationship between a supervisor and an employee's spouse that has involved the use of company time, the company vehicle policy, and, I believe, a documented misuse of the expense account on at least 3 occasions." He spoke evenly. He did not editorialize. He did not use the word affair. Patricia looked at the folder. She looked at him. "Mark, are you certain you want to move forward with this formally?" "Yes," he said. "I've thought about it for several weeks." She nodded once. She reached for the folder. He was back at his desk by 9:15. Rachel called at 11:40. He let it go to voicemail. She called again at 12:03. He looked at the screen and then put it face down. At 12:18, she texted, "Mark, please pick up. I know you talked to someone this morning. Please just let me explain." He read it. He typed nothing. She called again at 1:15, and this time he answered. "I'm at work," he said. "Mark." Her voice was controlled, but barely. He could hear the effort in it, the calibration. "I need to talk to you. I'm aware. Can you come home tonight? Can we talk? I'm going to stay at Petra's for a few days," he said. He had not told Petra this yet. He would call her after he hung up. "Mark, please don't do this like this. Please don't just, Rachel." He said her name quietly, and something in the steadiness of it seemed to stop her. "I'm not doing anything like anything. I'm going to stay with my sister for a few days. I think that's reasonable." A long pause. "I made a mistake," she said. The words came out shaped carefully, the way people say things they've rehearsed without quite admitting they've rehearsed them. "I know that doesn't cover it. I know that." "Okay," he said. "I don't know what I was thinking. I felt invisible, Mark. I felt like you couldn't see me anymore, and I know that's not an excuse. I'm not saying it's an excuse. You don't need to explain right now." "I want to." "I know," he said, "but I'm not ready to listen right now." That's the honest answer. Another pause. When she spoke again, her voice had changed slightly, gone quieter, less constructed. "Are you okay?" He considered the question. "I will be," he said. He hung up. He stared at the spreadsheet on his screen. He didn't read a single number for nearly 10 minutes, but he stayed very still, and after a while the noise in his chest became something more manageable. He called Petra at 2. She said, without hesitation, "Of course, come whenever." He brought one bag. He didn't think too carefully about what he put in it. Glenn Farber resigned from Devereaux Capital in December, framed in the company announcement as a mutual decision to pursue other opportunities. Mark heard this through his colleague David, who relayed it with the mild, practiced neutrality of someone relaying news they suspect carries more weight than they're being told. Mark said, "Thanks for letting me know," and returned to his work. The formal HR process had been quiet. Patricia Osei ran a thorough and discreet investigation. There was a meeting Mark was not part of. There was a settlement conversation he was not invited to, though he was informed of its conclusion by a brief email that thanked him for his professionalism and confirmed the matter resolved. He filed it and didn't return to it. He and Rachel were living separately by January. The house was hers for now. Or rather, it had become the place where the marriage's debris had settled, and neither of them had the energy yet to sort through it formally. He was renting a one-bedroom apartment 20 minutes away. It was on the 4th floor of a building that smelled like fresh paint and other people's cooking. He found he didn't mind it. He worked. He ran in the mornings, something he hadn't done in 3 years. He called Petra on Sundays. He started reading again. Long novels, the kind that required patience, and he found that patience, for once, came easily to him. Rachel texted with reasonable consistency, not dramatically, not desperately. She was too self-aware for that. She texted things like, "The plumber came. There was an issue with the upstairs bathroom. I handled it." Or, "I started therapy. I wanted you to know." He responded to the practical things. He read the personal ones and did not reply, and she stopped sending the personal ones after a while. He knew she was telling a different story about their marriage to the people in her life. He knew this not from eavesdropping or from Petra's reports, but simply because he understood her well enough to predict it, the narrative she would need to construct in order to make sense of what she'd done. In her version, probably, the marriage had already been over in spirit. In her version, they had grown into two separate people who had simply failed to acknowledge it. These things were perhaps partially true. He gave her that, but partial truth is not the same as honesty. and he noticed, without bitterness, that she was careful to omit the parts that left her without a sympathetic frame. Petra said to him once over the phone, "She called me," he said. "What did she say?" "She said she was sorry, that she wanted me to know she was sorry for what she put you through." He thought about that. Did it feel genuine? Petra was quiet for a moment. "I think she's genuinely sorry. I also think she's still figuring out who she is in the story she's telling." "Yeah," he said. "That sounds right." He didn't feel contempt when he said it. He had expected to feel contempt by now, and he found it wasn't there. Or rather, it had passed through him early on in the first days, and now what remained was something more like a low, settled sadness. He had loved Rachel. He had not been perfect in that love. He had been absent in ways he could now see clearly, and that clarity was its own discomfort, not because it absolved her, but because it required him to hold the full picture rather than the simpler, cleaner one. In February, he had dinner with a friend from college, a man named Toby who had been through a divorce 4 years earlier. They drank beer and ate badly, and at some point Toby said, "The worst part isn't the betrayal. The worst part is looking back and seeing all the places you stopped showing up and knowing that's not why it happened, but also knowing it's true." Mark nodded. He didn't say anything. He thought that was the most accurate description he'd heard. On the last day of February, Rachel asked if they could meet, not for any legal purpose. The paperwork was being handled quietly through a mediator, without hostility, but just to talk. She said, "I think I need to say some things to you in person. I'm not asking for anything. I just need to do this." He thought about it for 2 days. Then he said yes. They met at a coffee place neither of them had been to before. This was deliberate on both their parts, though neither acknowledged it. A neutral space, unmarked by the weight of memory. Rachel was already there when he arrived. She was sitting at a corner table, both hands wrapped around a cup, and she looked up when he came in with an expression that contained, he registered this immediately, no performance. She was not trying to look any particular way. She just looked tired and real, and like someone who had been living inside a difficult thing for several months. He sat down. A waitress came. He ordered coffee. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Sure." She looked at her cup for a moment. Then she looked at him directly. "I'd been trying to figure out how to say what I want to say without it sounding like I'm making excuses." "I'm listening," he said. "I think I told myself for a long time that something was wrong with us in a way that justified." She stopped. "No, that's not right. I didn't even frame it that consciously. I just felt like I was disappearing inside our life. And I took that feeling and I did something profoundly selfish with it. And the worst part is that I knew, somewhere, that what I was feeling wasn't really about Glenn. He was just the person who looked at me in a way I was hungry for." Mark listened. He did not interrupt. "I'm not asking you to understand it," she said. "I'm not asking you to forgive it. I just needed to say it to you without the phone between us because you deserve that." He wrapped both hands around his own cup. The coffee shop had a low hum of activity around them. A laptop open at the bar. Two women in conversation near the window. The espresso machine cycling through its noise. Ordinary life, pressing in from every side. "I know you were hungry for something," he said finally. "I think I knew that, actually, a long time before I admitted it, and I kept telling myself that if I just held steady, it would work itself back to where it used to be." He paused. That was its own kind of failure. Rachel looked at him with something he couldn't name. Not relief, not vindication. Something more complicated. "You're not responsible for what I did." "No," he agreed. "But I'm responsible for my part of who we became." She nodded slowly. They sat in the quiet of that for a moment. "How are you?" she asked. Actually, he considered. "I'm okay. I think I'm becoming someone slightly clearer than I was. I don't know if that makes sense." "It does," she said. "I'm trying to do the same." He believed her. That was the thing he found most difficult to hold. Not the anger, which had mellowed, but the belief. He believed that she was genuinely trying. He believed that she had genuinely loved him, in her way, even while she was dismantling what they'd built. People were capable of that. He knew that now with a precision he hadn't possessed before. Love and damage were not opposites. Sometimes they occupied exactly the same space. He finished his coffee. She finished hers. They talked for a while longer about ordinary things. The logistics still pending. A shared account they'd forgotten to close. What to do with the wine rack they'd bought together in Portugal on their 5th anniversary. These conversations were necessary and also, in their way, devastating. Not because they were painful, but because they were so normal, so marital, and yet they were the last of their kind. When they stood to leave, she looked at him with that same unguarded expression. "I'm sorry, Mark," she said. "I don't have a better version of that. I'm just sorry." He looked at her for a long moment. He thought about 9 years. He thought about Thursday dinners and the green sweater and the conversation in bed about whether they talked enough, and the way he'd turned a page rather than answering her fully. "I know you are," he said. They walked out of the coffee shop together and then, without a dramatic pause or a long farewell, turned in opposite directions. He heard her footsteps behind him for a moment, and then they were absorbed into the sound of the city. A bus, a voice, a door swinging shut somewhere. And then there was only his own. He walked for a while before he hailed a cab. The city was cold and gray and entirely indifferent in the way that cities are to the size or smallness of what had just happened. People passed. Traffic moved. A street vendor's radio played something he didn't recognize. What he felt, walking, was not relief and not grief precisely, but something adjacent to both. The particular weight of a thing that is concluded. He had loved someone. He had not loved her well enough, or consistently enough, or with enough attentiveness to the ways she was trying to tell him she was drowning, and she had loved him, and she had also chosen to wound him in a way that could not be undone. Both of these things were true. Both of them would carry the shape of this marriage in different ways, in different directions, for a long time to come. He thought of something Toby had said at dinner. The worst part is seeing all the places you stop showing up. He thought, the next time, if there is a next time, I will show up differently. Not perfectly, but differently. That was not a redemption. It was just a quiet intention, held lightly, the way you hold something you're not sure you deserve to keep yet. He got into the cab. He gave the driver his address, the new one, the 4th-floor apartment that smelled like paint and other people's lives. He looked out the window as the city moved past him, unhurried, unnamed, indifferent to what he was carrying. He was 38 years old. He had been a husband. He was learning, slowly, how to be whatever came next. The cab turned a corner, and the street where they'd had coffee disappeared behind him, and he did not look back.